It's now my pleasure to introduce Brian Krebs and Lance James with Spyjacking the Booters.
All right, hey, everyone, thanks for coming. My name is Brian Krebs. I'm an independent investigative reporter right at KrebsOnSecurity.com. I think this is my fifth or sixth black hat, I can't remember at this point, as a journalist. And I'm kind of used to being where you guys are in the audience and heckling the speakers, so it's kind of surreal to be up here. But hopefully you'll be kind to me, and I guess karmically it's okay if you're not, that's fine. I've got a lot of stuff to cover in a very short period of time, and my buddy Lance James here, who I'm sure is no stranger to a lot of you in the room, is going to be bringing up the second part of the talk, talking about some of the more technical aspects. So if I blaze through this stuff real quickly, I think we're going to have hopefully a little time at the end for Q&A. But if you guys think I talk fast, wait till Lance gets up here. Holy crap, he makes me look like I'm slow in the brain. So this talk is it's about a pretty active area of the underground or semi-underground or whatever you want to call it. It's about a proliferation of DDoS for hire sites that are basically springing up left and right. And for the most part, they're run by teenagers or young men here in the United States who frankly aren't doing a whole lot to hide their identities or even trying that much, it seems. I want to state up front what this talk is not about. It's not about, mysterious organized Russian cyber criminal hacker gangs or anything near that level of scariness. Although the kiddies, the script kiddies that are running these sites, they do certain things to try to make themselves seem a little more elite, like, they'll register their booter, their DDoS for hire site at like .su or .ru domain names and make them look a little more elite than they are. But what we're dealing with here in this talk is, for the most part, admittedly a bunch of script kiddies, or what my friend and collaborator Allison Nixon likes to call the new persistent threat, NBT. If you didn't catch Allison's talk, you really missed it. It was a good talk yesterday. Actually, most of these guys are so noobish that calling them script kiddies is probably an insult to the script kiddies of old. I mean, at least those guys could like open up a command line and do their script from a command line. That being said, I think it's a disservice, and I think there's a general tendency to dismiss the activities of script kiddies because, I don't know, maybe they're not lead enough, they're not scary enough to help companies sell security products. But I think it's a mistake to discount these guys because some of the stuff they're coming up with is pretty ingenious stuff. I mean, one of the forums I'm going to talk about today, Hack Forums, it's an absolutely noob-tacular forum. It's awesome. A lot of these guys are selling their services on there, but they're selling things like remote access Trojans. They're selling things like, botnet code. And this stuff is showing up in some really scary places. Like, I think Dark Comet Rat showing up and, the Syrian government using it to target activists and, I don't know, maybe kill them at some point. So just a little bit of background on the DDoS for hire industry. This is not a new industry. I'm sure most of you understand that. Just about everyone you ask who monitors DDoS attacks these days are noticing they're not only becoming more prevalent and more damaging, but a lot more powerful. More importantly, while the targets of these DDoS attacks have traditionally been sort of, the e-commerce sites, the banks, and these days, if it has an IP address, somebody's going to packet it, right? They're going to get attacked at some point. Some of the increase that we're seeing on the DDoS attacks is no doubt due to automated build your own DDoS kits, right? Like Black Energy, Dirt Jumper, Darkness, make it stupid easy to build your own DDoS army. But even if you can't be bothered to do this, you can't be bothered to build your own DDoS, there's always been services that you can hire in the underground and go to take somebody offline, right? But these commercial DDoS services typically have a few qualities that really limit their client base. Number one, a lot of them, they don't have websites. It's some guy who's put up an ad like this, and you have to know where on the forum to find the guy, and you have to chat him up in ICQ or Jabber. And if you don't speak Russian, it might not be the easiest thing to do. And Oh, at the end of the day, if you want to pay for one of these attacks, you're not going to use a credit card. You're going to use something like web money, right? And for your average Western guy who wants to take a website offline, he's not going to have a web money account. He's not going to want to deal with that whole thing. What's interesting about these booter services, and what we're talking about today, is they don't have any of those shortcomings. They call them stressors. They call them stress testing sites, right? Because nobody uses it to take any other site offline except their own, right? And they're designed for use by U.S. citizens. Okay, I didn't make this up. These booter services, they cost pennies per attack. So some of the other DDoS for hire sites, they can cost $5 to $50 a day. And that may sound like not a lot of money, but for the guys who really want to pay for this stuff, it tends to be. And the best part of this, you can go to these sites and create an account, and once you've funded it, you just put in the IP address or the host name of the site you want to attack, and you're off to the races. And the best part is, there's no need to deal with web money and all these other virtual currencies and Bitcoin and crap like that. You can pay for it with PayPal. That means you can just launch DDoS attacks with your credit card. So, good times. So how did I get interested in the new persistent threat, these DDoS services? Well, it started with a story that I wrote last fall about one booter server called AbsoBoot. And AbsoBoot, like all of these booter services, is advertised and chiefly marketed in a noobtacular forum called Hack Forums. And the story that I wrote about AbsoBoot noted that the guy who was running it, he was also running a similar service called TW Booter. It was created by a guy on Hack Forums named Orgy, a very big time seller there. And the story noted that Orgy hadn't been super careful with safeguarding the privacy of his information. He really hadn't even tried that hard to obfuscate who he was. And it noted that it was run by a 23-year-old kid from North Carolina named Robert Davidson. And this kid, he'd been busted a few times for different things, as you can see here. I think the latest one was robbing a local policeman's house of his firearms. Again, we're noobtacular, okay? Enough said. But anytime you write about these guys on Hack Forums, they get their dander up, they get a little pissed off, because they're very proud of the forum. They've got a lot tied up into it, a lot invested in it. And they start, lashing out at you a little bit. And so that's what happened. Right after I wrote about this, I started getting some anonymous threats. People sending me emails going, hey, Krebs, you gotta watch your back. Somebody's gonna swat your ass. So, you guys don't know, anybody doesn't know what a swatting is. It's when somebody calls in to your local police and pretends to be you and says there's a hostage situation going on in your house, and send police right away. And usually, if you don't answer the door, they kick in your door, and all kinds of bad things can ensue after that. Well, I really didn't want this to happen to me, so I reached out to my local police and I said, can you please send an officer out here? I want to file a police report. And the guy came out, he was really nice. He'd never heard of swatting before. But I said, look, if you get a call that somebody's like pretending to be me in a hostage situation in my house, here's my cell phone. Just freaking call me, okay? Don't kick in my door. They don't reimburse you for that, by the way. They don't. So I didn't get swatted, at least not then. But fast forward to March of this year, and I wrote a story about a service in the underground that was being used to pull credit reports on celebrities and public figures. And the guy, so let me actually fast forward. The guy that did this is the site, is called expose.su. And basically, he started posting the name, address, social security number, mother's maiden name, previous addresses, all this stuff, like basically anything you'd find in a credit report, started posting it on the site. So he did it for like Paris Hilton, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Kanye West, a whole bunch of other guys. When he got bored with that, he started doing public figures like the First Lady of the United States, the Director of the FBI, the Director of the CIA. And a lot of people were like, holy crap, if they can get this information on the Director of the FBI, they can get it on anybody. And I said, the story that I wrote noted, it said, now we're talking about the right question here. Because all of this information, every single one of you in the room who lives in the United States, that information is for sale. So like $5 to $10, you can get it all. And I said, this is one of the sites where you can get this information. It was a site called ssndob.ru. It's no longer there. It's at a different place. This is actually the account of the guy that set up expose.su. And you can see he's looking up Sarah Palin and Britney Spears and Tom Cruise. He actually looked up my information as well. So I wrote about this and I said, look, this is out there. This is probably how he's doing it. I didn't know it at the time that he was. And the next day I get a interesting email from my hosting provider, and they're like, hey, Krebs, just FYI, we got a letter that looks like it came from the FBI, but it's kind of not really all that official looking. But they said you were hosting illegal content on your site and we had to take down your site. And they kind of laughed because they're in the Netherlands and they don't really care. But I also got the same email forwarded to me from Prolexic, which is a DDoS mitigation site, DDoS mitigation service that actually protects my site from attacks which are happening more often than not. In fact, my site's been under attack most of the day today. So they sent me this notice and they said, just FYI, and I thought that was kind of interesting. And they said, oh, by the way, your site's under attack again. It's down. We're going to fix that. No problem. So about an hour later, I'm vacuuming the foyer because I was expecting my mom and my aunt to come over for dinner. It was about 5 o'clock, and I noticed there's a whole bunch of tape on the wall and the door, around the door. I'd put some Christmas lights up, and I decided, this isn't good. It's March. I'm gonna take this stuff down. So I taken the tape up and grabbed this tape ball, and I noticed it goes on the outside. So I open up the door, and sure enough, there's this entire SWAT team out in front of my house. A whole array of squad cars, AR-15s or whatever it was, pointed at me, pistols, shotguns. If that never happens again, it'll be too soon. And they're like, put your hands up, walk backwards. So I had this tape ball in my hand. And he's got, what's in your hand? Drop it. I'm like trying to get this freaking tape ball off my hand. I'm like, holy crap, don't shoot me. They're actually really cool about it. I said, the first thing I said was, you guys are being tricked. I told you this was going to happen. Shut up, get down on the ground. They put me in handcuffs. They brought me up the street, and eventually this guy looked like he was in charge showed up, and he goes, "Are you the guy that filed the police report about swatting?" I'm like, "Yeah, that's me, jackass." He goes, "We did call you. We called your cell phone," and they did. I checked it later. They called it. The phone was upstairs. I was vacuuming, like I said. So I decided this whole experience, getting hit with a kinetic and a cyber attack at the same time is just too good not to write about. Come on, if this happens to you, you're going to write about it. So I started asking around about the DDoS, what might have been responsible for the DDoS. And it turns out that the DDoS, the booter site that was used in this attack, and Lance is going to talk a little bit more about this in a bit, booter.tw, again, remember that, just had its SQL database hacked. And whoever did it, I don't really know, but I'm eternally grateful. Basically, put it on the booter's own site for download from their site, which I thought was wonderful. So I included a link to that in my story. But the database showed that the same account at this booter service that was used to attack my site actually was used to knock Ars Technica offline for about an hour. My buddy Dan Gooden at Ars Technica had called me after I tweeted about the SWAT. I'm like, yeah, I just got swatted. He goes, what, WTF? He goes, can I interview? And I hadn't even had a chance to put my own story up. And so he did. And so I guess, whoever it was attacking me, I didn't know at the time, attacked Ars Technica as well. So I did some digging on who was responsible for calling the SWAT to my house. And that led to a 20-year-old kid in Milford, Connecticut, who used the nickname Phobia. This kid denied doing my SWAT, but strangely enough, he admitted to being the guy that hijacked the iCloud account of Matt Honan at Wired.com. I'll come back to that in a few minutes at the end of my talk. But if you haven't read this story, it's epic. I just couldn't believe this guy's like owning up to. I know his name. His dad gets on the phone. He goes, "Hey, my son didn't say he hacked Matt Honan's account. He said he knew Matt Honan." No, it wasn't. But that was kind of surreal. So Anyway, after spotlighting what was going on with Booter.tw, I started taking a harder look at the booters that were popular on hack forums. And it wasn't hard to learn, for example, that one booter that had thousands of paying customers was asylumstressor.com. And somehow in the course of my reporting on this guy, the database for Asylum Stressor got leaked as well. I'm not really sure how that happened. But it pointed to the owner as a 17-year-old kid, honor roll student from Chicago. And the database showed that Asylum Stressor had more than 30,000 paying customers, registered users, and that it had brought in more than $34,000 in subscription payments via PayPal. This kid set up his business very much like a legitimate cybercrime business. Wait, that doesn't make any sense. Like you expect some like Russian cyber criminal business. He basically had paid a bunch of guys at bulletproof hosting providers in Romania to power most of his service. Asylum, like most other booters, markets itself, as I said earlier, like a stress testing service. But so nobody's going to attack anything but their own site, right? But all of these services, all these booter services include all kinds of ancillary add-on services that let you discover the IP address of people or websites that don't want to be found. So yeah, nobody's using it for stress testing anything other than their site. And they all have these disclaimers like, hey, this has all been vetted by our lawyers, and we're not responsible for what you do with this. We're not responsible for what you do with our service. The next booter that I looked at was Rage Booter. This is by far the most interesting and entertaining one I looked at. The guy who runs it is a young stoner kid from Memphis. His name is Justin Poland. And again, a big time hack forums user. And I think he's kind of an idiot savant. He was not hard to find. So he's on Facebook, and I'm like, this is kind of cool. I'm just gonna go ahead and chat this guy up, see if I friend him and see if he'll talk to me. And he did. I couldn't believe it. He's telling me. So I'm like, we're talking, we're chatting on Facebook, and I'm reading like his posts that he's putting up. He said he by his own admission, he smokes pretty much all of his income from the booter service. Something like $1,200 worth of weed a week. I don't even know how that's possible to smoke that much weed. I mean, maybe it's MILF weed, like one guy in a week, right? But anyway, but he's seriously devoted to his site. As you can see from this Facebook picture, he got it tattooed on the back of him. TLDR, Rage Booter's database also gets popped. Again, I'm not really sure how that happened, but kind of a serendipitous occurrence there because so I start chatting him up and I'm like, hey Justin, tell me more about your business. And he's like, oh well, look, my service is vetted by lawyers and everybody's okay. And by the way, if you have any doubts about the legality of my service, I work at the FBI once a week. I go into the Memphis field office and work at the FBI once a week. And I'm like, hey, this is unreal. So so he says, at first I was skeptical, and I said, so I came back to him, I said, hey Justin, and he said they let me keep my site up as long as I give them backdoor access to my site. So I said, hey Justin, I called the Memphis FBI office, and they said they don't know anything about you. They don't know Justin Poland, and they don't have any idea what I'm talking about. Maybe you can give me the name and the number of your handler. And he did, as you can see here. And he said, oh, it's Agent Lies. And I thought, oh God, seriously, right? This guy is named Agent Lies. Bullshit. So I call him up, and Agent Lies, he doesn't want to say who he is. He doesn't want to confirm or anything like that. But he basically sends me to he says that you need to talk to the guy in charge of the media relations at the Memphis field office. It's this guy, here's his number, and then he hangs up. And then you can see it at the end of this, at the very bottom. Like 2 minutes later, Justin goes, I have been asked to block you. Have a nice day. And that's it. So anyway, I did a little research afterwards because I'm like, this Agent Lies thing is too much. But it turns out there is a special Agent Lies in the Memphis field office, and he does a lot of cyber cases. So I mean, maybe the guy was telling the truth. I really don't know. Rage Booter, like pretty much every single one of these booters out there, was hidden behind Cloudflare, and as I'm sure most of you know, is a content distribution network. Ironically, is used to probably most often to keep sites online in the face of lots of traffic, particularly DDoS attacks. Apparently, running a DDoS for hire service kind of makes you a target for competing DDoS for hire services. So if they're not behind Cloudflare, the whole thing falls apart. So that got me to thinking. I'm like, what if there was no what if these guys, if Cloudflare said, you know what, we're not going to deal with these guys anymore. We're going to kick all these booter services off our network. And I think if they did that, it would be a very good chance that this problem would kind of take care of itself. So I asked Cloudflare about this, and Matthew Prince, the CEO, referred me to a blog post that he put up last summer, in which he basically said, look, we don't want to go there. We don't want to be the arbiter of who can put, what kind of content that we want to allow on our networks. He says it's a slippery slope. And allow me to quote from that post. He basically says, Cloudflare is firm in our belief that our role is not that of an internet censor. There are tens of thousands of websites currently using Cloudflare's network. Some of them contain information I find troubling. This is the CEO writing this. Such is the nature of a free and open network, and as an organization that aims to make the internet faster and safer, such inherently will be our ongoing struggle. While we respect the laws and jurisdictions in which we operate, we do not believe it is our decision to determine what content may and may not be published. This is a slippery slope down which we will not tread. Okay. I get this, right? As a journalist, I'm a big backer and proponent of the First Amendment. I think people should be able to put whatever the hell they want on the internet, and if it offends you, too bad. But in this case, I think there are two kind of, I don't know if you call them conflict of interest, but for me, first of all, the purpose of these booter sites is to take sites offline, basically to stifle speech, okay? And number two, I mean, Cloudflare, I mean, they're basically a big DDoS protection. And then the fact that they're harboring all these booter services and not really making an effort to get them off their network, it seems like a conflict of interest. Anyway, and I reached out to PayPal as well, because I sort of thought, well, you know, this is the other way that this booter industry would just kind of fall apart if these guys weren't able to take PayPal. And PayPal responded, they said, I'll give the short version of it. They basically said, hey, we take security very seriously at PayPal and do not condone the use of our site or in the sale or dissemination of tools which have the sole purpose to attack customers and illegally take down websites. Oddly enough, RageBooter's, I think RageBooter's still online, it's still able to accept PayPal payments, as is Booter.tw. The booter service that got me interested in this whole thing in the first place. Just one final note about, actually I'm going to skip that. So given that a lot of these script kiddies on hack forums who are running these booter services are here in the US, which most of them are, it might not be unreasonable to expect that at some point, you know, and they have no OPSEC, it might not be, you know, completely unreasonable to expect at some point they're going to get a visit from the feds or from the local cops. But maybe not if the hack forums, the same forums that become a breeding ground for these businesses, is actually working with the feds itself. I discovered something really interesting about the administrator of hack forums. He's a 40-something guy named Jesse LaBroca. He lives right here in Las Vegas, actually. And in mid-2010, Jesse seemed to be taking steps to like clean up hack forums. There were a lot of guys on there that were going, were selling financial, you know, banking Trojans, Zeus botnet stuff, you know, carding, all kinds of things. And Jesse said, you know what, if you guys want to talk about all that stuff, do it somewhere else. You know, you need to get off my site. And by the way, if you really want to do that, we're creating a new forum for you guys. You know, if you want to get on, just message me for an invite code, and you'll be good to go. And he said, oh, for all you hack forum members who have VIP status, which is like basically a paid status there, your VIP status will transfer over to this new site. Well, that new carding site turned out to be carterprofit.cc, which was a fake carding forum set up by the FBI. And here's where this comes full circle. and I've been kind of sitting on this on this information up to this talk, but I recently discovered that the kid who swatted me and used booter.tw to DDoS my site was the same kid who's primarily responsible for building expose.su, that site that was doxing all the celebrities and the public officials. I mentioned that the story that Matt Honen's epic hack, he did a follow-up not long after that, where he wrote a piece called Cosmo, the Hacker God Who Fell to Earth. This was about a 16-year-old kid from Long Beach, California, who was responsible for a lot of the UG Nazi attacks, so sort of kind of the LulzSec anonymous stuff. And he was one of the guys that ran with the crew with the Phobia I mentioned earlier, was very tight with. And Phobia, the same guy who acknowledged hacking into Matt Honen's iCloud account. Well, this 16-year-old kid from Long Beach was among 24 members of CarterProfit.cc that were arrested last fall for allegedly trading stolen credit card accounts and other data. So, incidentally, those who read the Wired story about this kid, the Cosmo, are going to know that this is the same guy who took credit for hacking into the Gmail accounts of Cloudflare CEO Matthew Prince. And the crazy thing about the Cloudflare hack, I don't know how many of you remember this, but basically Cosmos and his pals, they mainly used it to redirect 4chan's DNS to their UG Nazi Twitter feed, but they could have done a heck of a lot more damage with that hack. But anyway, I've overstayed my welcome. I'm gonna ask Lance to come up and bring up the rest of this. Thank you.
Hit the two button. We get technology up here. It's kind of cool. How is everybody so far? What? All right, so it's my turn. So I'm Lance James. Some of you know me. I now work at Deloitte. Don't ask, it's cool. But I get to do some fun stuff. So we're gonna kind of go through the story here, and like where I got involved is Krebs and I have been like friends for years, and have done some crazy cool stuff together. He's taught me a lot of cool stuff, and I've taught him a lot of cool stuff, and we just kind of do cool stuff. So basically, I kind of started, I'm going to go from kind of like basically the investigatorial perspective from a technical sense. I did this over pretty much, I think, my lunch break in some ways, a lot of the work. And I was actually, it got to the point he was like, dude, go to bed. Because I was actually mixing up names and stuff. But there was some fun stuff for me. And I was like excited. So in a bad way. It was terrible for you, but I mean, it was exciting for me. So basically I started looking at things. I tend to like look at things from the psychological profile perspective first, and then we get into the computer stuff. I don't just want to go at things. So I basically looked at motive and what's going on. So we obviously know he was a target of attack. He provided probable links when I talked to him related to SSN DOB we saw in the fake FBI letter. There was like motive is starting to get it linked together. He had some information that the TW Booter stuff service was being used in this attack. So, I started looking at like, okay, well, who does these type of stuff? We got swatting, we got DDoS and stuff like that. So before I get into like, I'm so used to profiling groups, and I have organized crime groups, I have Middle Eastern groups, I've got like, anonymous and LulzSec chaotic organizations, and I got to figure out which group am I even thinking about here? What kind of adversary are we dealing with? So I broke this down from like basically a simple like behavioral profile. So we obviously have the intent was obvious: disrupt Brian all day, make him have a shitty day. Basically, they were using swatting and DDoS is usually a fear tactic, it's overly hostile. The guy's sending a clear message. So tell me what you really feel about Brian. Basically, clever, tactical, capable. But, we saw like in the behavior, it's short-sighted. I mean, we forget that Brian's friends with a good amount of information security professionals, and we like them, And so like one of the things I did on the back end was get coordination, worked with some people, and, some people over at Back End Ninjas, Daniel over here and Allison and all this stuff. We all had like coordination. People were ready to go, he's a big voice for us. So we saw that this kid's short-sighted. It's like, what are you thinking? You're going to get exposed. Like, this is what we would do, so I looked at that, and I basically also looked at the history of the arrest records of, swatting and DDoS, and you'd see they're from 12 to 20 years old. So I know what kind of adversary adversary I'm dealing with. This was basically a risk assessment I had to look at, working at the company I look at and say, well, can I, bother with this, right? Typical kid hacker, antisocial behavior type mentality. Let me go into the actual looking at the terms of service, because I also look at things legally from one perspective as well. So it's hard to see here, but basically Brian covered it earlier. This is about basically showing that the terms of service is literally don't use this to attack unless it's your own site, things like that. So they have all their plausible deniability. And in my opinion, working in cryptography for years, plausible deniability doesn't really exist. And we can talk about that offline sometime. But basically we go through that. We see all these fun little things. And these are on almost every site, some terms of service here. And talking about the infrastructure, what's also clever about it is when you look at breaking down the infrastructure, you have kind of three big tiers. You have the user to the website. Now, if they're hosted, even if Cloudflare's behind, in front of it, or just even the ISP that are really hosted at, you don't see that DDoS traffic going out of there. So the ISPs are not, that are hosting the web service part, are not aware of it because it's not having any traffic going out, it's just the web. And then they have these back-end ISPs that are handling the actual weaponry, and then they have the proxies and all the stuff that's actually hitting the servers and everything. So in a way, basically this is there's no proof. It's hard to take these things down, and it gets a little difficult because you kind of have to put together an entire case. Obviously, as he's brought up, hackforums.net, very interesting site. There's a lot of things that are going on over there. Basically, I kind of looked up about these booter services because honestly, my focus wasn't in this, and then I kind of had to catch up and go, okay, what's a booter service and stuff? And so I started trailing back and found the TW booter code leaked in the forums. We seem to see that obviously these kiddies, just like I've seen back in the early days of swatting, they swatted each other first. They weren't hitting celebrities first. They were hitting each other. It was like gang war. When you come down to the profile of it, it is very much like that. So, so I joined the forum with not my real name, obviously. Grabbed a copy of the code. I did some code research. I've gotten pretty good at web AppSec over years. So I perused through the code, found some basic understanding of web application and their file structure. I even set up my own TW booter locally because it lets me understand how the system works, what's available. And what I get into, and this comes into some legal exploitation because that's important to me, is basically what I call inferred access. I know a file is sitting on there. It may not be advertised that it's there, but it is world readable to me, right? So I basically go and I study this code and I say, I know where unknown files may be known, incorrect direct file permissions. That's one thing a kiddie doesn't know anything about. And publicly accessible files, including maybe, I don't know, database export scripts. So, that's been kind of a fun thing. So I'm going to try to decently, and if I'm talking too fast, just, raise your hand or something. But then we go into basically as Brian said, there was these SQL files keep getting hacked and then being launched everywhere. So I sat there and I look at it from extracting. I basically it was a publicly accessible file when I found it, so I basically grabbed it. I saw that it was sitting, as he said, on the backup directory basically of the booter site. So basically, I quickly did something so that we can confirm we're in the right track. So search for Krebs on security inside the booter file. Of course, we've got a hit here, so that's good for us. So now we have Krebs on security. Now, the dates are in Unix format, or, basically, so this was something that, where we got to get all technical. So I wrote some quick conversion code and stuff, and basically, we start looking at our first date of the DDoS attack based on the story that occurred, and we see it's Thursday, March 14th, 1:13 EDT. I basically worked with Brian to also work with Prolexic and share the web logs, and we all kind of started looking and doing some web log correlation, and that was matching the time for the attacks that were occurring, and when they picked it up. Obviously confirmed with homeboy over here, basically, and so, more the merrier confirmation, obviously. Then basically I started looking at the SQL database itself and looked at the user IDs and stuff. They got a table here you can kind of get to learn how this stuff is. So I'm looking at the users. And then basically we get a user ID 126 is, basically it's very hard to see here, but it was the countonme@gmail.com that Brian wrote about. And we started tracking that and then going from there. So Brian then tells me about, we see this article on Ars Technica, the next day, and it's okay, cool. There's this article about this whole thing, made big news. And then Brian's like, oh shoot, they're DDoSing the site. And, everybody, I don't really have to go through Dan Good and everybody knows and everything like that. So basically we suspected the same motive, attack all things Brian Krebs. This also very much goes back into the psych profile of it's likely a kid, because that was, again, a very impulsive behavior. So one problem is my booter SQL file does not have historical logs. So we, basically make an effort to change that. You guys, what's that over there? Oh crap, so there's a booter SQL that just landed on my computer. I don't know how that happened, but basically we'll just call this one booter2.sql. Guess what happens? Up to the minute logs, just what I need. So, we got to fear the foo, pity the foo bar. So basically, so we looked at I have these logs somehow, these targeted analysis, and I look at Ars Technica, what's their IP address. So I guess what, searching, wait for it, and we have Ars Technica. And we basically have to do a couple of things. Gate conversion. Guess what, guys? Friday, March 15th, 11:54 EDT. Pretty much confirmed with Krebs and that it was going on live. Epic fail for the bad guy or win for us, obviously. So moving on. Basically, I started looking at database analysis after this. So this kind of, post-mortem a little bit, like we wanted to kind of get more understanding. So to get a bird's eye view, diverse activity and stuff, we want to basically be able to look at like how many people are on this thing, what areas there are. Now, this doesn't rule out the fact that a lot of them can be proxies, things like that, but it just gives us an idea of diversity and the involvement of the service. We also have general goodies that are actually important. Inside it, you have server IP addresses, you have CPU that's being used, attack capabilities, and we have the passwords. I'm going to warn you that the next part has a kind of, most of the passwords are a little bit, how do you say? It could be offensive to some, but basically we have all this access in this database. This, I like to learn about what's going on from behind the scenes here. And then we basically get into following the money. Okay, to me, from that perspective, from a forensic view, the closer I get to the the adversary is actually where the money is. Higher ends of validation, higher requirements in that. As much as we're saying, we bring up PayPal and stuff, they do a pretty good job at validating who's on these accounts and stuff in a lot of sense. And I actually happen to work a lot with the PayPal investigation teams in the backgrounds, and they won't necessarily share details with me, but if you notify them, they will take action. But what's kind of neat about these booters is because they use PayPal, we actually kind of see like little things like their email address that you're actually paying the money to. Now, in most cases, you're probably not. You're going to assume that that's not a stolen email in some case in these cases. But this one is even better because the actual domain name is the last name of the actual person involved here. So I'm putting it in the higher probabilities that it's probably not a hacked Gmail account or anything like that. And the domain name belongs to a guy that looks like this. He might be here, you never know. And then basically we got into looking into this guy because I kind of did the who is and got the information and everything like this. And he's only got one thing, he's actually done a great job of separating if he is involved in the booter services. He's done a great job of separating himself in most cases from the booter stuff than the owner of that and then the actual, his personal life. But what I did find really coincidentally is the only thing he's got on his Google Plus site is Cloudflare promotional type stuff. Like he really likes it and he seems to like Cloudflare. So that was kind of an interesting coincidence. Also what was interesting is I did some investigation on this, and the real person works in InfoSec at a major financial institution, and so there is an internal investigation being in progress. And also, when I went through the code, some of the payment process code was in French, Quebecian specific French. So we're going to quickly show that, and then we're going to erase it. So basically, I started looking at this stuff. What's cool, and I would love if this talk was longer because this couldn't go into some of the non-kids that I've been tracking through these logs, and there's a ton of people involved in this stuff, like the users. But some of the big ones that, been on the news and stuff, targets were like whitehouse.gov, CIA.gov, BarackObama.gov, DDoS is, the FBI.gov, I'm sure the NSA, I'm pretty sure I saw a couple of the NSA IPs in there. I saw a lot of big financial institutions in there. I saw this guy named Krebs on Security. It sounds like it's a big site, something like that, I remember. But, so basically, there's a lot of stuff. There was actually 631 distinct targets in there. Some of them personal, obviously. You can kind of but you get to really map their activity, and you can so I've been working on putting together kind of like a timeline of this offline. I'd love to discuss sometime. So I also wanted to get into the actual DDoS TTPs. Now, there was some leaked source code on hack forums as well. that basically my discovery of this actually, when I started looking at, like, Brian was like giving me other, and he's showing me, dude, there's tons of booter services out there. I don't know if he said dude, but I heard it dude. But basically he's like, there's tons of booter services out there. And like, so I started looking at like Asylum and a few others. And aside the fact that they all have funny little vulnerabilities that are laying around, and I'm not surprised that they're getting hacked, they also use the same back-end code for this, for the weaponization. So the C code is all about the DDoS exploits themselves, and I can guarantee you probably the kiddies didn't write this stuff. It's probably been around for a while. But what's great for that for us is when you think about it from a holistic perspective, you can sit there and write remediation stuff, capabilities off the analysis, and cover the entire gamut based on the tool. So basically, we did some analysis. And here are the basically 8 types of DDoS. You saw a little bit of that when the drop down, you'd see the, Rudy or 7-layer get this and that. So we have the AMP, which is a UDP amplification attack using Chargen. So basically port 19. We have ARME.C, which is an Apache remote memory exhaustion. A lot of people probably, if they've had to deal with like that, it's been around a while, but there's some that's a pretty popular one. We also have what's called ESIN.C, which is just a standard SYN flutter. We have lag.C, which is basically the same as AMP, but with slight timing differences. I don't know why they didn't just make a separate function, but that's cool. We have scloud.c, which is a Skype DDoS based AMP. So what it's based on is AMP. So it's the same code as AMP. All it is it now has a Skype IP resolver using speedresolve.com. They have a slow LRS attack, which our snake pretty much invented, so you're famous. Basically, and now that was basically one of the popular attacks as well. And then we have the Rudy, which is basically, are you dead yet? It's a long form field submission type of attack. And then we have GHP.C, which is get head post flutter, which you saw a few of those in there when Brian was showing his stuff. So I was looking at some of this stuff in this analysis, and I have a few other people to thank on this at the end of this, but basically we were going through the code, and we basically categorize it. So the AMP, lag, and the scloud, you can basically use standard UDP volumetric countermeasures to take care of. So if you have a Prolexic or Radware or anything else like that, or even standard firewalls, you can handle that in most cases. The ARME, the Apache killer snort signature will work for that, but you can also do some regexes on range, and the bytes, I kept them up here. Hopefully you can see them. If not, glad to give you guys them offline or whatever. That has pretty much very much pattern. The ESIN one is also, we've done SYN flooding forever, so that's standard countermeasures as well for SYN. The Slolaris, basically there's some regex rules on this specific one where it's like X dash and then there's 7 random lowercase letters and then colon space 1. So basically I show the regex below that, so you can pretty much have that set up. The Rudy, basically on this tool, there's a regex on the default settings, which these kids aren't changing. There's this thing sitting on, these European like ISPs just ready to go. It's pretty much this whole thing, like these booter kits, you can just pretty much unzip, install, go, right? So basically the username equals zzz ... is pretty much there, or you can find a few other things if it gets changed. The get head post one, basically the rule would be to use HTTP authentication or basically look for the missing except star headers. So I include a regex there for something like that if you have filter rules. I was kind of doing some stuff this morning, seeing what was kind of the latest ones on booters. So, my joke on Google here, plus one on booters. We have a new set of lists. Again, I checked all of these. They are hosted on cloud. Well, they're not hosted on, but they are basically protected behind Cloudflare. So they go with the whole competitive space here. So we have like the DDoS stressors, distress stressor, onion stressor, quantum stressor. So his Star Wars list could keep going, I think, right from the beginning. And then basically, I was looking at like what's going on next, and what we did see. I saw this today. It was kind of awesome. So, I was kind of thinking, piss off on the go. Well, I'll take them out on the go. So, Brian, I'm kind of upset with you. I'm DDoSing your site right now. So, so basically, they're getting the mobile devices fully compatible, HTML5 style stuff, basically. But like, you don't really have to like go get an app for that. You can just like basically be compatible. So we obviously see, some interesting there. So I actually am going pretty early today. So. Got time for questions, but I did want to give some thanks out, obviously, to law enforcement, some FBI involvement in helping Krebs and I as well. Daniel Clemens over there, Mr. Packet Ninjas, actually has provided a lot of assistance in this and has some awesome like snort rules for like even other DDoS tool sets out there. Allison. Nixon. She's been awesome and stuff. I want to give a help to Arbor Networks because they also were involved in some of the analysis stuff I did. Jamie at Cloudflare, and she's actually been cool. So as much as we might seem like we're coming off like Cloudflare this or that, I've had some good luck with Cloudflare in some areas, and it's just going to take like a coordinative initiative to take all of this stuff down, but they're definitely helpful when I've asked. So my company, just for like allowing me to do this crazy stuff that they are going, wow. Mr. Krebs over here just being like taking the heat for all of this. And you guys out there, and Prolexic as well, and Black Hat, and anybody I missed. So any questions, I guess? All right, yeah. So, yeah. He told you I talk fast.
That was pretty fast, dude.
Yeah, it was too fast, huh? Any questions, guys? So,
Anyone?
anyone? Bueller? Was that too fast? Just not. Just run. Oh. Just yell.
Yeah. Hey, Matthew. Matthew Prince, the CEO of Cloudflare.
So I actually have a really legitimate question, which is,
Mark.
Oh,
I'll just go up on stage.
yeah.
Use that.
We're going to have some people who have time to walk up on stage for questions.
So I actually, is this on?
Yeah.
So I have Brian, you reached out and I wrote back to you. I actually tried to schedule some time to call and you never called me, which made me sad. You're looking pretty good for all the heroin, by the way.
Snap it, slap it, and zap it, baby.
So like, where would you draw the line? So if someone, let's say the New York Times put an article up and said, here's how you launch a DDoS attack, I know you wouldn't take that down. If there was merely an advertising site that said, we offer great DDoS, call this phone number, would you knock that offline?
No, I don't know.
So again, what I'm going to say is these aren't simple questions, and I'm totally happy to have this discussion. And we have 1.5 million customers. Some of them, the Turkish government, the Muslim Brotherhood, organizations that really do suppress freedom of speech and cause me great consternation. Use us like crazy. And so, I'd love to have this discussion with you. And so, I proposed some times that you could call me and you never called. It was very sad. And so, if you'd like to talk, I'd be happy to do this, but it's not an easy position that we sit in. So, I appreciate this, and this is great work, and it's been great working with you guys.
Is there any interest in taking down the booter sites?
So again, I would love, my ops team would love me if I took all the booter sites off Cloudflare. My ops team, we hate this. They don't pay us. If they do pay, they pay with stolen credit cards. So that's just a disaster. And so, what I would love is due process to work its way through. And so, I don't know. I think that it's really tricky when private organizations act as law enforcement, and so we try to follow what is due process, and that's
Have you got any requests from law enforcement to take down any of these booter sites?
So we've gotten two different types of requests, and this is actually something that I would have loved to talk to you about if you'd ever called me. I can actually show. I looked the emails up when I was and I was like, did I drop the ball somewhere? But 3 emails with specific times. I'm available at any of these times.
Your blog post was so succinct. I mean,
well, who needs to actually ask questions as a journalist? So
That's pretty bad.
So we sometimes are having really, we have two issues. Sometimes we have law enforcement issues that ask us to take things down, and we honor those if a court orders us to. Strangely, sometimes, and again, this is the rock and the hard place, but sometimes we have court orders that order us to not take sites down. So, for example, the Carter Profit site, the FBI's site, that was also a Cloudflare customer.
Understood. So the answer to the question, though, is no?
No, we've had court orders, and we comply with any court order that we receive unless we feel that it's truly abusive. In these cases,
booter related. Nobody's asked you to take them down.
I don't know. There have been, again, what's a booter and what's not a booter? There have been some hacking related sites that we've been asked to take down. So, yeah. Anyway. No. It is
Like I said,
purely marketing.
the front end was just the web. That's why it's also tricky. You can't see it going on. If he did, I'm sure he would be like, "We're taking that down."
Yep.
So-
That's exactly right. Anyway, thanks for being a good sport.
Yeah. Any other hecklers out there? There must be more hecklers. Come on. Nobody? All right.
Any more questions? Yeah, just come on up. We got time, actually.
How long do you estimate it's going to take to those script kiddies to smarten up and, I don't know, maybe ask law enforcement to investigate who has been dumping those database on the internet? And
Are you asking about OPSEC? Like,
no, it's obviously not me or not you, so I'm sure it's, there is no problem with OPSEC there. But what I'm trying to say is that they might take it further than just, swatting people.
Yeah.
And they might eventually, we all started script kiddies.
they might like send heroin to your house or something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, it could happen.
No, but I do take the point of, not, if you're not law enforcement, you shouldn't maybe act like them, because they are acting within a certain legal framework where the rules are supposed to be the same for everyone.
Right.
And the kiddies abusing the rules is probably not a good idea, but I believe in leading by example.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I would say that okay, so it's funny because it's this like dichotomy. You see, you have really bad OPSEC where they hide behind the legal, right? So you are getting this kind of like trade-off. Like, yes, you know who I am, but what are you going to do about it? Which is kind of a teenage mentality in some senses, right? So I was kind of getting some of your question, but I'm not sure if you're saying they're going to get worse or better at like some things they do and like take it farther out and they can still protect themselves. But I think here's the problem. And I was discussing this with a law enforcement guy that was kind of like he was pretty innovative, and I was like, look, we could actually make a simple anti-swatting thing, a website that basically he can sign up to and says this happens, and if you look at swatting, TTY terminals are what's being used. There's no voice on the phone. The only voice you have is an operator on the other end. And you can sit there and say, I don't want to be swatted. I'm going to put my name on this. I'm likely a target. And then you can start building like a cognitive awareness to the 911 saying, hey, send a SWAT, or here's an authentication method of calling back until this, or like taking like reserve, right? And the problem is what came up is, well, now you're asking a 911 dispatch thing to slow down something. Now, the only time we're going to actually really stop this problem or start solving this problem is when someone gets shot, right? And that's what's going to happen, right? So your question is, when I looked at this, I'm like, this is borderline terrorism, right? It may look like a bullying thing to those kids because all they see is their computers and this tool and it sounds cool. His life, it could have been worse. It could have been less. I mean, as long as you're not injecting the heroin, I think we're gonna be okay though. Right. But so yes, I expect that we have to find this balance, and we us both law enforcement, community, the InfoSec community, journalists, everything. We're all trying to come together. That's why these things exist, so that we can sit there and have discussions with Matthew over here and maybe figure out how do we find this balance that we still protect people, especially as you're seeing more kinetic incidents happening with cyber, which is, going to be problematic. I think as we go along, I mean, that's the idea, is that we're trying to preemptively do this. And that's why these arguments come up. It's are we going to do something about it? So does that help at all? Okay, cool. Any other questions? I see something. Oh, there we got one. Or there we go. Sorry.
So where do you kind of draw the line with enforcing what you think is the right response, and where someone else, say, those who are in that position of responsibility, elected or otherwise, take over? You guys seem to have a lot of skills in this area, and I mean, where do you kind of draw the line?
Would you give me maybe an example of a scenario? Sorry.
Let's say you had some DDoS tools, and these guys are working behind Cloudflare, and you said, hey, they're DDoSing me, I'm just going to DDoS them back. Where do you?
Oh yeah, I don't think that's not a good, that's a terrible idea. But yeah, you continue the retaliation. There's a line there, there's a lot of lines, and the work I do, it's behind a lot of legal things anyway. So there's a lot of permission gotten and steps to take and things like that. And a lot of it is very passive, forensics. And really, it's like when I worked with him, we handled all this to the law enforcement, and they pretty much kind of going where they're going now. I don't know where the Cloudflare parts piece in or where that is, but I will happily report, and I do work a lot with their abuse team, and like happily report in issues there, and expect them to do what they're supposed to do on their end. But that's also comes down to their business, and it's like it's different pieces. And if things start getting hard, you want to push harder and you figure it out, or you get creative and figure out how we get movement on stuff. It's not a right away a process. It is law enforcement, and it is, like due process is said, is not always where we want to be. So it's like, I don't know about like where there's certain lines, but it really is down to an individual situation in most cases, as long as you know where you're supposed to stop and what your duties are. So,
Question over here.
So follow up, Lance, you made your investigation look really easy, which to me means that, you showed real-time access to data, passwords in the clear. So either this kid was really dumb and he didn't configure anything, you could just grab the files, or you have some kick-ass tools and know the right people. So which one was it, and what would you have done if...
Good question.
Well, actually,
Offline, yeah.
correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of these booter services are based on the same source code, which is now open source. And so what you tend to find is the same vulnerabilities across multiple services. So
Yeah, and that's a good offline question. So it's complicated, and we're running out of time, and love to answer it for you though. So, yep.
Last question over here.
I was just going to respond to one of the questions out here. We've responded to a lot of different incidents where there was a kinetic option given to our clients. There's not an answer for every single incident. But the problem we're dealing with in different scenarios is this is either going to be a State Department issue with your government or a law enforcement issue with your government. Either way, you're not going to be getting justice for like a minimum 2 years most of the time. And if your intellectual property is walking out the door, what's that doing to, the 10-year turnaround time on your return on investment for your intellectual property? And you have different options in different countries just by the nature of how those different countries operate when you're dealing with international incidents. So, there is a place for, in my opinion, the free market to maybe show up to some said bad guy, buy him a beer and say, we know what you're doing, please stop. It doesn't mean we totally turn around on the other side, but I think you have to get creative with some of these problems, because law enforcement, State Department, all that kind of stuff, they have a ceiling, we all have a problem,
Thank you, guys.
Yeah,
Thanks for your attention. Really appreciate it.